This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We're brought to you by Prize Picks, coming in Thursday afternoon. It's June 13th. And coming up on today's show, we will be joined by Britt Robson from MinPost. And we're going to have a conversation about watching these NBA finals kind of through a Wolves lens, mostly talking about what we've seen Boston be able to do against Dallas in this series that the Wolves weren't able to get done, kind of asking, could the Wolves do this differently next year? This sort of thing, what styles of play they can work in there. I think that'll be an interesting just way to talk about this series that has gotten a little uninteresting at 3-0. Before we bring in Britt, wanted to let you know that we have still been having episodes. If you're just hopping back in here, 2 weeks ago, we had a guards recap with Chris Hine talking about Anthony Edwards, Mike Conley, Jordan McLaughlin, Monte Morris. Earlier this week, Chase Frederick and I recapped the wings, and that was like Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kyle Anderson, those guys. So you can go back and find either of those. Then also there's an episode in there with John Krasinski and Kyle Tyge where we touch on the latest in Wolves ownership with Michael Bloomberg and what's kind of playing out there as the Wolves ownership situation kind of takes on new shape. But before I bring in Britt, I wanted to let you know that today's show, as always, is brought to you by Prize Picks. I actually got my pick right for Game 3 of the finals. I had Maxi Kleber making less than 0.5 threes in that game, and he did not make a three. He's just not really shooting them. So I thought that was a good one for Game 3. My Game 4 pick is going to be Al Horford snagging more than 7 rebounds. He had 7 in both games 1 and 2, but only 5 in Game 3. Though in Game 3, no Porzingis. Horford played, I think, 8 or 9 more minutes after playing under 30 in those first 2 games. So I like his role to be able to get him to more than 7 rebounds in that game. As always, you can play Prize Picks at prizepicks.com or in the Prize Picks app. You can use the promo code DANE for a $100 sign-up bonus. And we also want to let you know that for this playoff season, we are brought to you by Autograph and the Autograph app. You can download it in the App Store, Google Play Store. It's a one-stop shop for team-specific content. If you go to the Timberwolves community on Autograph, you can see all the off-season articles. You can see the shows like my show here or Flagrant Howls that Kyle does along with all the team content. It's all nice in a free app. Again, it's called Autograph. You can scan the QR code, and please do use the referral code DaneMoore to let them know that you came from us. Again, fun, easy way to consume your Wolves content this summer, this off season in the Autograph Timberwolves community there at the Autograph app at the App Store or the Google Play Store. All right, we are now joined by Britt Robson from MinPost. I was thinking this is probably going to be our last pod of the 2023-2024 NBA season. The Celtics Mavs series is 3-0, which probably means there isn't much left to it. Britt, it's been a Boston sort of dismantling of Dallas here, which I think, I don't know, having just watched Dallas so much in the previous round or the previous 3 rounds in many ways, it's been interesting to think about what Boston has been able to do against Dallas that the Clippers weren't able to do, that the Thunder weren't able to do, but specifically the Wolves, that's the one we were most dialed in on. So what's just kind of been crossing your mind watching this series about what Boston has been able to do to Dallas that the Wolves in particular weren't able to do?
Well, it's not rocket science, unfortunately. It isn't. My answer isn't, incredibly creative. Dallas is playing a team that is so familiar with each other and knows how to play team defense in a way that, we talk about like playoff experience of Mike Conley or Luka Doncic or anybody for that. Tatum and Brown have played more playoff games together than Mike Conley has played.
Jeez. I did not know that. I was also on Al Horford's page. It was more his basketball reference.
Yeah, 121
Yeah,
games.
his is insane. You got to scroll. I was just trying to get to the most
Tatum's
recent
is 111. Brown's is 122.
That's
See, they're young, but you got to remember they played into the finals twice, and they played into the conference finals, I think at least once and maybe twice. These guys have played together a long time. They're in their prime, and they are unselfish. I mean, for somebody who ripped, Mazzulla for just like up and down almost his entire tenure, he has gotten his team to really be one of the best examples of teamwork I've seen. I mean, they're 15-2 right now, and
it's wild.
And everybody talked about what a good series Indiana gave them. They swept Indiana. It's like, and they gave a game to Miami when Miami just shot the hell out of the ball.
Right.
And I actually think the Cleveland game too was simply they took them for granted because, Cleveland won 7 games with Orlando. When this team is meant to win, they win. And I just think if you want to get technical about it, they don't feel the need to double Luka. And the one time they did that was really noticeable, he blitzed them with Lively on a ferocious slam dunk, like almost immediately. It was almost like, if you don't take your seizure meds, you're going to get a seizure the next day, I mean, like this whole idea that if you neglect anything for just a second with this Dallas team, they are ready to, wipe you out. And the Celtics don't fall for that. The people that have been on Luka the most have been Brown, Holiday, and Tatum. I mean,
it's tough.
Brown is 223 pounds. Holiday is a world-class on-ball defender, arguably the best over the last 5 to 10 years in the NBA. And Tatum is 6'8" and wiry as hell. And they all have a lot of playoff experience. And 2 of them have an incredible amount of playoff experience with each other. And Holiday's got 14 years in the league and, 17 playoff series, 87 games of his own. He's won a ring. This team, I picked Dallas in 6 or 7. I think I said 7, but I actually thought that Dallas, the way they dismantled Minnesota's defense, I really thought was instructive. They make you pick 1 of 3 options or 2 of 3 options. You're going to get beat by. You're going to get beat by the lob. You're going to get beat by the corner 3. You're going to get beat by the layup. And the Wolves could never solve that.
That's why the Wolves series wasn't instructive, though. I mean, I was in or has proven not.
Well, it's counter-instructive.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's good to lead with like the teamwork element of it or the experience element of it, because like as important as X's and O's stuff is, like that is probably the most important. But I think you hit that, and I think when I've just had some more time to like get together with friends these last few weeks, just texts and stuff like that, I think, and watching the finals, the number one question I've gotten from friends who are watching the Wolves was like, why the hell is Dallas not been getting lobs and corner 3s like they did against the Wolves? And just because we watched that series so much and spent so much time breaking down why that was happening, it's pretty clear, to me, it is the simplest way to put it is by putting 2 on the ball, Luka or Kyrie, when they set that screen up top, one of 2 things is going to be left open. And that is going, depending on how they kind of play off of that.
Right.
Yeah. The lob or the corner 3, or even if you're not putting 2 on the ball and you have Rudy in a drop, you have the floater there, or you have the lob threat to Gafford or Lively. And that's what the Wolves are not, a switch 5 defensive team, which is what Boston, I mean, when Porzingis is out there, they were really trying to keep him out of it, and they weren't switching with Porzingis.
On the other hand, that definitely took away both the lob and
he's there.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing to note is that the Wolves don't have that style of gear to like kind of click into that Boston does, of being able to switch and not really lose anything in the shell of their defense. The Wolves, when they're putting two on the ball, now you're reliant on Ant or Cat, on the back line to kind of play that 2-man of like tagging the roller while also getting in the corner. And the Wolves just weren't very good at that they were terrible at it in the Dallas series.
Right.
And Boston hasn't even put themselves in that situation to get hurt by Luka there, because they are just switching it and staying there. So I would think, that is the biggest thing is not playing in coverage against Dallas as much.
And also, I really do think the depth of on-ball resilience. I mean, the Celtics go at least 4 deep. And I mean, you can't think of 4 better on-ball defenders on the same team than White, Holiday, Tatum, and Brown. I mean, they're all exceptional on-ball defenders, and they're all a little bit different. And then the second thing is the ruggedness. The refs are letting a lot go in the final, more so than in the Wolves series where they let a lot go. I've really enjoyed it, by the way, when they let them play, but it does make a difference. And then the last thing I want to point out is, as good as Mike Conley is and has been for this team, and I'm not taking anything away from him, he had a calf injury. He was at the end of a really long series, and he had the worst defensive rating by a mile on this team during the Dallas series.
Do you think that was more injury or the ability to need to cover, because he's 5'11", and we talked a lot about he is the tag guy to defend the rolls while he's 5'11", or you maybe can't have him guard Irving, or they tried that for one game.
Some of it was definitely scheme. I mean, Finch could clearly be second guessed by saying, well, the guy has to tag. Well, I mean, come on. These guys, we've gotten to look at what Lively and Gafford can do. And if they're going baseline on Mike Conley, it just isn't going to happen that he's going to capably stop him. I mean, we knew that, or we saw that in action. But also in terms of, well, what do you do then? Because Luka is literally too big for him, and Kyrie is still too quick for him, especially with a calf injury. And so you could not put Conley on ball. And unless you wanted to replace him with Nah in the starting lineup, you weren't going to make a situation. That was not a matchup that worked for them, and just in terms of what they had to offer. And, I found it interesting that Nah had the best defensive rating. The Wolves were the best defensively with Nah on the floor. Second was Slow-Mo on the floor. Well, some of that was they came into the game. Certainly Nah came into the game more when Kyrie sat and Hardy came on.
Yeah.
And so it isn't necessarily a fair comparison. But I also thought that Nah is in that Celtic mode of anybody, with the possible exception of Ant when Ant wants to play. Now, Ant doesn't have the resilience to do it. So if I were to say, if you were going to add a 5th person to that White, Holiday, Tatum, Brown contingent, who on the Wolves best fits that template? It's not McDaniels, who, even though, Basketball Reference has him listed at 185, I think it's 200 now, but it's still not heavy enough. And all these other guys, So Nah, I think, and I thought this during the series too, he should have been on Kyrie more.
Yeah, you said that repeatedly. Yeah, and I think in hindsight, yeah.
On the other hand, the other part of it is have an offensive identity. The Wolves were 18th, 17th, whatever you want to call it. Boston was in the top 5 or top 3.
Yeah.
And they did it because they shot threes. And, some really revealing stats. Assist to turnover ratio, Dallas 45-35, Boston 78-34.
Whew.
2-pointers, Dallas 89 for 172, 51.8. Do you think with all of Boston's threes,
Right.
Boston 72 of 121, 59.5. If Boston shot 17 for 51, which as it turns out was exactly 1 out of 3, 33%,
Right.
they would tie Dallas in terms of 2-pointers. They shot 51 through fewer and made 17 fewer. So on 3 points, on the other hand, Dallas 22 for 78, Boston 43 for 127. It's just not fair there. Fouls, each team committed 50 fouls. Free throws, Dallas had 59, Boston 53. They were only 2 apart, so fouls were a wash. Blocks, steals were about the same too, by the way. Block shots in this series thus far, Boston 20, Dallas 5.
Wow. Well, so
that's execution.
Yes.
The reason they're not blocking shots, they have shot blockers, but Boston passes the ball extremely well. Jrue Holiday, it was a re-education of Jrue Holiday moving without the ball. I mean, if you want to get Anthony Edwards some film, have him watch Jrue Holiday on offense.
Yeah.
Because that guy is always in the right position, whether it's an offensive rebound, a cut behind the line for a quick pass. I mean, that guy knows what he's doing on offense. He's got such a great defensive reputation, but his positioning on the offensive end is just textbook.
Well, and they have had him in the dunker spot whenever Kyrie's on him too, because now then Kyrie becomes your rim protector. I mean, Jrue Holiday is 6'4" and can play and guard 1 through 5. You know what I'm saying? Like
it's amazing. Right.
I think Boston has executed everything in the series, and they have the personnel to be able to execute different things. Right. And I think that's what the Wolves run into, even just like the Conley Nickeil example, right? Where you go, all right, well, we could have got more defense if you would have played Nickeil more than Conley. Right. Then you have the offensive fallback. And I think that's part of the, because we were both saying that sitting next to each other during the series of why isn't Nickeil in there? Or why and what also happened to Nickeil in that series is the shot and his offense abandoned him.
Right.
So the trade-off and Conley and Alexander Walker are just one example. There was all these kind of different things that the Wolves could have adjusted to, or maybe even at times did adjust.
Like the slow-mo, for example.
Exactly.
I mean, what you gain and lose there.
And then even that is a little bit of a roll of the dice of is slow-mo going to be able to help you offensively?
Right,
that one did work, but they needed 5 of those things to be able to compete with Dallas, given the way that their personnel had to guard Dallas. And I think that's just kind of where it's not that the Wolves didn't have enough or weren't good. It's just they couldn't put it all together of 5 players at the same time. The Wolves, when they had their starting lineup out there, kind of felt like Boston does when they have Peyton Pritchard out there, or some of their bench units where you're okay, can they survive this? Right. Well, you shouldn't be, can we survive this when it's our, starting 5 out on the floor? And I think that was just the ability to execute different personnel groupings.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was, again, what's really fun about this is how many times, I know I've done it 15, 20 times at least, watched the last 3 rounds of the playoffs and said, holy shit. I mean, these teams are so far ahead of the team I covered this year in terms of watching what happened. And the gap was much smaller this time, but what that did is it pinpointed the ways that they fell short. The analysis of why there was a gap was much more acute. I mean, I was able to see, for example, that as good as Jaden McDaniels is, he's a certain type of defender,
right.
And he's not quite the Swiss Army knife. And maybe Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Derek White aren't either. It's just that they have each other, you know, and they're switching. I mean, that team switches so well, and it's just been a fascinating textbook.
It's just textbook shell defense.
Yeah,
like that's what like a high school coach should put up of like, you know, we're switching everything here, because it's not just switching, it's like switching without like sacrificing depth. You know what I'm saying? Like,
and it's switching without a noticeable change in on-ball coverage.
Right.
I mean,
that's the biggest
crazy
thing.
And it's like one guy switches onto another, and you're okay. So where's the mismatch now? There still isn't one. I mean, you know, you're basically usually what you're trying to do on a pick and roll is create a mismatch. And where have the mismatches been on pick and rolls? Right. I mean, when Pritchard and Hauser are out there, you immediately see it. You say, all right, you know, and even then they battle. But it's like, all right, now I see why they try to do this when the other guys are in. But if you're switching Jaylen Brown off of Derek White, off of Jason Tatum, off of Kristaps Porzingis, off of Al Horford, I mean,
when you only have 24 seconds, that's a big factor there too. Like Dallas could take their time to get there a little bit, to get to the matchups that they want to get to. If you like switch, but like there's just only so much time, particularly if you're playing kind of slow. If you're Dallas, let me grab our first break here. We'll come back and I want to talk about Porzingis because that was interesting to me from the Wolves angle. Today's show is brought to you by Your Home Improvement Company, and if you are considering a bathroom renovation, we would love for you to consider Your Home Improvement Company. This summer they have a 30% off bathroom remodel, whether that's a complete bathroom remodel or just a simple tub to shower conversion. 30% off. That's backed with a lifetime warranty, 0 down, 0 interest, 0 payments till 2026. Same thing goes for their windows deal. They have triple pane windows that are buy two, get two free. This summer, they're installed by certified professionals. Also come with that lifetime warranty, 0 down, 0 interest, 0 payments until 2026. So if you are considering a home renovation this summer, we would love for you to consider Your Home Improvement Company. And you can do that by going to yourhomeimprovementco.com, which is up there on the screen, or call 866-777-YHIC. Your Home Improvement Company, where it's your home made better. And then also, we want to let you know about our friends over at Falling Knife Brewing Company. Pretty much every weekend throughout the summer, they have a different kind of fun, funky event going on. This weekend, they have their Fright Night Market, where it's a bunch of, what is it here? Vendors selling horror memorabilia, VHS tape, vinyl records, vintage books, all that sort of stuff. They're going to have the Parlor food truck there. That Fright Night starts at 5:00 on Saturday, but we just want you to be keeping Falling Knife on your radar throughout the summer. A good way to just kind of see what the schedule they have going on is to go to their Instagram, which is Falling Knife BC. That's what I have up here on the screen. Again, that's Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. Britt, I think what really stands out to me about in this series is like the very beginning of it, from a Wolves perspective. When I'm thinking about it through my Wolves lens, and what Kristaps Porzingis did right when he checked into Game 1, and I'm thinking about that from the standpoint of like, oh my gosh, this is what the Wolves needed Cat to do, to be this matchup nightmare. I went back and looked at that first half of where Porzingis had like 20 or whatever in the first half. First bucket, it's a pick and roll. He's guarded by Lively, pick and roll. Doncic switches onto him. He goes to the elbow, scores on him. Next one, same thing, guarded by Lively, switches Hardy onto him, scores on him. The next one, Lively really presses up. Porzingis blows by him. It's where he had that big two-hand dunk where it looks like his feet like scratch the ground. Then he had that big block, gets out in transition. It's a cross match. Smith is on him. Again, shoots right over him. Bombs a 3 on Gafford the next time, who's like playing a little further back, not pressing up on him. Gets another one, pick and roll. Derek Jones Jr. switches onto him, shoots over him. Pick and roll with Smith, shoots over him after getting the switch. And then his last bucket, Horford was out there at the 5. So Porzingis is not being guarded by Dallas's 5. Luka is his primary defender. Again, squares him up, shoots right over him. And I'm sitting there and he's scoring these buckets. And I'm like, man, this is exactly what the Wolves needed from Cat, was to just be this matchup problem that forces Dallas to change the way in which they're guarding everything else.
Right.
The question, though, is that possible if Cat isn't at the 5 like Porzingis was? All of those 20, all those buckets in the first half, only one of those came. The very last one, where Horford was also out there with him, and I think that's that's part of the difference there. Of Porzingis is probably he's a little bit taller, he's a little bit better at that, just shooting over you from the elbow thing than Cat is, but. We've seen, remember pre-Rudy, when Cat would get doubled at the post all the time, they still wanted to play through Cat. Where would they put him? The elbow, the nail, the free throw line, just to be able to be like, it's hard to double me here, and I can just shoot over you. That's what they needed, but it kind of goes back to the issue of, can Cat be that much of the offensive weapon matchup problem while at the 4 rather than at the 5? If he played the 5, if Rudy was just like, randomly out in that series, I think Cat's way more of a matchup problem against Dallas, but you need Rudy. This is like going back to what we were talking about with Nikhil Conley, right? It's like this sliding door moment of like, okay, you get rid of that. Well, how do the Wolves defend Dallas when Rudy was off the floor? Terribly. So you needed these things from different iterations of 5-man groups from the Wolves, but they never found a way to kind of patch them all together to be 5 at the same time. I just thought the Porzingis one stood out to me so much, and obviously Cat struggled against Dallas, so maybe that shines a light on it a little bit more. But when I'm thinking about next year, what the Wolves need to do to involve Cat a little bit more often is just finding those places that you can put him in a position to be that sort of matchup nightmare, particularly if you've been able to force a switch and Jaden Hardy's on him or Smith is on him. That really stood out to me.
And that does get back to, how did I start this thing? Boston has become a juggernaut because they have learned how to work together in ways that maximize what they do. And, a lot's been made of Tatum being like a facilitator in this series. What I loved about Tatum's series thus far is that it didn't seem he wasn't even trying to probe most of the time. What I've always said is Ant should at least probe the offense a little bit to get it. Well, again, you've got it. I find it ironic that whoever is on that team, whether it's Derek White or now Drew Holiday, somebody's going to shoot like 45% from 3 because the ball movement is so good. And if somebody can hit open threes like Mike Conley, but like Cat, if you have a ball movement offense that is 3-point centric and you almost run the old, Dwight Howard or Hakeem 1 in, 4 out, put them around them like a rainbow and moving it in and out. Maybe that's the way to do it. Now, what do you punt there? You punt Cat's low post game. But
that's the corner offense in the modern NBA. And that is exactly what Finch talked about at his end of season press conference or exit interview, was playing a little bit more like Jokic and Murray. And that's what they do. They can raise Jokic up to the elbow and play like the corner offense, that sort of way. And that was what Finch, to your point, kind of posited as we need that to be deeper into our offensive identity.
And I always felt like Finch saying, we don't want to just put Cat in the corner. He's more than that. It was almost like he kept running into the logical conclusion. We got to put Cat in the corner, but we can't do it. Kind of explaining to everybody. Yeah. I never felt like we're not going to do this because Cat's better than that. It was like, we should do this, but Cat is a different person than that,
Yeah.
And I do think it's time. I actually think, quite frankly, Cat is ready. Cat has matured to the point where if you're going to stick him in the corner and have him be, the Drew Holiday, Derek White outlet for, a 45% shooter, hey, guess what? You're not going to be 17th in offense anymore. I can tell you that. Right. If you have Anthony Edwards on your team and you've got Cat in the corner shooting 11 threes a game.
Got to be 11.
Well, I mean, Boston shoots so many threes. Boston has shot 6 more threes than twos in this series thus far, and it's not an aberration.
It has been something that's been nitpicked over the Missoula era for sure, of like being over.
Now, how's that working out?
Exactly. No, I'm saying it. So it is maybe of one of those things that you growing pain grow into. You know what? When I think about Cat in the corner, what I like about it is it's always quick. You can't really you get a catch in the corner. Can't really think about all right, I got 3 different options here. It's basically
right.
I'm catching it and I'm shooting it. Whereas Cat at the top of the key, he's got the lay of the land in front of him, which just leads to some delay, which I wasn't even thinking about this from the Porzingis thing until I went back and watched Porzingis's possessions in that game. When he catches it at the elbow, he holds and he assesses.
Right.
But when I was going through that, I'm like, every time he caught it on the perimeter, it was touch immediately out of his hands, unless it was going up,
Right.
And that's where, and this is gonna be to your point of maybe Cat being ready, it requires some rewiring, I think.
Right.
Because I actually think Cat's a better above the break 3-point shooter than corner 3-point shooter.
Yes, he is.
And for sure the numbers bear that out. I think that's rare that a player would actually be better at it. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. That's just my read at looking at it, is he's just more comfortable when he can kind of see the basket straight in front of him, rather than the corner. He's not been a high 3-point percentage.
Also,
from
he's got huge feet. And I mean, there is so little room over there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he will. I'm sure he'll be bugged by how many times he turns it over, just shifting. If the pass if it's a little behind him or something, he'll easily go out of bounds. I mean, there are problems.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why the 3-point shooters are usually lithe guys, these kind of svelte. Malik Beasley being the ultimate, champion of tiptoeing the line and twisting himself for a jumper on the move. But I do feel like if Cat makes this, if the passes are as simple as Boston has made them, the thing that has been fascinating about Boston is that they have a great assist to turnover ratio because they make the simple, quick pass all the time. There's not a lot of fancy passes. The most fancy passes that happen with Boston have been interior bounce passes to weak side cutters. I mean, that has been the prettiest, quote unquote, prettiest play. Right. But most of their assists are just boom, boom, boom. Your fourth pass is to a wide open guy behind the arc, and he buries it. You know, and that's a 3-point. That's better than Pete Maravich over the top alley-oop for a 2. I mean, this is 3 points. It's 3 points. And so to be able to do that, and who's to say? I mean, all I can say, though, is Golden State won a shit ton of rings shooting threes, and Boston is doing it now. And the Wolves have Mike Conley and Cat, who are career 40% shooters in my book. Yeah.
Well, and Ant in catch and shoot situations is over. Well,
and even if he isn't, if you've got those 2 guys spread, here we go. And then there's Rudy. So again, there are ways to make this offense hum, I think.
Yeah, counter argument would be, I think,
spacing.
But yeah, well, Boston, and I think about Oklahoma City as these 2 teams so committed to the dribble, pass, shoot, drive and kick style of play.
Right.
And I always thought, remember back at the trade deadline, everybody's losing their mind over Oklahoma City not getting a center. Right. They need some size, need some force on the interior. And obviously, what you and I both watch a ton of Thunder games. They needed some size for rebounding and physicality, but to go and get a center and plop them into the dunker spot would completely change the way in which Oklahoma City played and was thriving and growing. And you can't just add that in there and hold on to that 5-out identity. And so, maybe Hayward was a half measure, but I actually kind of got Hayward at the same time. Like if he would have been 3 years younger, it's like, okay, here's a big, like 6'8", kind of physical, can probably help you on the glass, can still drive and kick, having that game. And I think, which is all to say, like Boston has put together a lineup a whole roster construction that so perfectly can play that.
And
I don't know if you can I don't know if you can have that identity. And the Wolves don't need to have, it's not the only way to win, but I don't think the Wolves can play with that identity if they have play offense that way, if they have Rudy Gobert on the floor and in the dunker spot there in that way.
And that's a legitimate counterpoint. Did you happen to hear Presti's exit interviews, or at least read some things about it?
Yeah.
He said they didn't want a center because they didn't want to hurt their defense. I thought that was fascinating,
Interesting. Yeah, okay.
I mean, he said,
it was 2 hours, a 2-hour press conference.
We're not going to sacrifice rebounds for the sake of our defense, is what he said, which is fascinating to me. And also fascinating to me that they're going after Hartenstein, who is a very, very interesting center for them. Because
he loves Sabonis, man. That's like discount Sabonis. I always
and the offensive rebounding. I mean, the one thing about that team, how many times if Shea does miss at the rim, how many people is he taking with him when he does that? I mean, there's a ton
and same with Boston. How many times has Tatum gone to the basket or Tatum's shot terrible? But there's Jaylen Brown, tip dunk.
Exactly. Or Derek White, or or Holiday. I mean, Holiday's making a living in the paint. Totally, it is. Yes. I mean, it's kind of funny because you think a drive and kick game, a couple of things would be wrong. One of them is, how do you get back in transition? You have you got at least one guy who's driving. You got all these other guys that are shooting from three, and they're spread all over the court. A long rebound is going to kill you, but Boston doesn't get beat in transition. They rush back, and again, I got to give Missoula credit there. We hustle their ass off, but they also just have a group of athletes, and OKC plays kind of the same way. They get back. They're kings of transition both ways, I mean, they turn you over and they get back when they turn themselves over. And so it is fun basketball. I mean, Finch always likes to talk about playing fun basketball. It is a a lot of fun to watch. It's different than Houston's 3-point shooting because it's not, James Harden and Chris Paul.
Not stationary. It's
not them figuring. It's not an outside game. It's an inside out game. You go inside and then you go out. And so I understand how Rudy's presence certainly affects that. But I also think that if you just make Rudy the cleaner upper I mean, he always has been good at putbacks. You just have to figure out a way to keep him out of the way on the drive and kicks, something. Maybe he's the screener at the nail or
it's just finding him on lobs more, man. Like if Ant could if his guy comes over and Ant could find him a little bit more, I think that makes a world of difference in that.
Right. But again, then that isn't as Porzingis could be doing that. They do that some, but they don't do that a lot with Porzingis. I mean, Boston and OKC is so committed.
But Rudy's a better lob threat. And we maybe don't really remember, we don't see it that much in Minnesota, but he's more of a lob threat than Porzingis is. And obviously Porzingis is much more of a perimeter, just shooting.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Is. So and none of this, or at least to me, is to suggest the Wolves need to change their identity now into a spread floor type of play or not, not having.
I think they should have it in their bag.
So that's an interesting question, and I would assume difficult. Can you have that in your bag and have it really functional while also having this very different style of play?
But that's specifically what I asked Finch in the exit interviews. You worked on defensive versatility last year. Can you be versatile on offense this coming year, or don't you have to be? And he said yes. Now, again, it's the easiest time to say yes, right? Because, everything's on the board. But I am curious. Again, I keep coming back to the idea that if in fact the high pick and roll with Rudy and Conley gets scouted out, how do you take advantage of Mike Conley being a 40-point 3-point shooter, 40% 3-point shooter, on a team that has one a floor spreader, one just a triple threat. It just feels like, and then you've got, McDaniels. The talk about McDaniels being one of those cut and kick or cut and drive mid-range guys. There are tools here, I think.
Yeah.
And I also think Nah can really fit if they want to go Nah Conley in a tiny backcourt every now and then. One of Finch's little playthings sometimes. Right. He likes multiple ball handlers. Nah has been surprisingly effective at finishing. He seems to be able to put that left-handed banker over people, and I don't think he has a chance at it.
So here's how I think about it.
Okay.
Like, I think they're going to get to that eventually. I think that's probably
after Rudy's gone.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's like I don't think that's a bad thing to say. I mean, maybe the idealistic one is like, let's try and put it in our bag as a secondary thing that we can
or
play.
Even a third thing, right?
Yeah, sure. But eventually, I think if Rudy whenever that is, moves on, and Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, and Naz Reid are all on this team and kind of become the core of it. Like, how can we say with those players that the best version of them when they're all 25, 26, 27 years old isn't going to be switching 5 and playing 5-out offense? Like, that just seems like that will be the best style of play for those three when they get to their primes. And now you're going to need other pieces to fill in for that. Right. You'll be missing Rudy in many ways. You'll be missing Mike in many ways. But like, that's kind of the collision I think they're feeling right now is Cat, Rudy, and Mike have a best way to play and kind of an only way to play.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the younger guys probably have another way to play that they're not really great at yet, but likely will. Like, I think Anthony Edwards in a couple years, the way he plays will look like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like, I just think that's how the style of the offense will probably look. And particularly if you move a center out of the dunker, like that opens up a lot for him there. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing to go forward with. You need to, can I just say this real quick?
Sure.
I'm not saying it needs to change right now. And I don't think there should be a drastic one. Add it to the bag. You should lean into the identity that you have with Rudy and Mike. It's a really good, it's a good identity. There's a lot of low hanging fruit to improve the offense, but I think it's one of those things. It's, back to like the 2 timelines sort of thing. That's how I kind of think about the 2 timelines is like in a stylistic change eventually, whenever that is.
2 reactions. One is we've seen glimpses of it with the Iowa Ants.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was fun. And Jalen Noel types are a dime a dozen. You have a Jalen Noel type out there, and Nikhil actually could maybe function that way and be a better defender. But the idea of going 5 out and cavorting, I mean, I don't know if McDaniels can do it. That's the thing that was interesting, as you were talking. Can McDaniels be that kind of a guy?
Can he be giddy?
Ooh.
I mean, like, and better than that. I mean, he already is better than that from a shooting.
No, I know what you mean in terms of, I mean, if he would be disciplined enough, I agree. Yeah, that would be interesting.
Well, don't we assume discipline comes with age from Jaden? Probably.
I do not.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I feel like what makes Jaden McDaniels tick is a different beast. And I'm not sure you can assume quote unquote maturity. I mean, I just feel like, when we were out, it really, what made me think about it even more was Jim Pete when we were all doing that thing out at Falling Knife. And he was saying, think of what it takes to just chase somebody around all the time and fail a lot, but just constantly have this little war that you're conducting with your man. like almost aside from anything else. And then Finch saying, he wants to win every possession. To be really, really good at such a thankless task. And what is fascinating to me is the players who have been really, really good at it eventually broaden themselves skill-wise to the point where they're not that so much anymore. Like Mikal Bridges, we talked about with Jim Pete, which I thought was a perfect example. I was saying, be careful what you wish for with McDaniels' offense. If it gets a little more, you may not get that defense that you had. And he said, well, look at Mikal Bridges, because he's suddenly, when he was getting 25 a game, he wasn't giving you that absolutely shut down defense, because it's hard.
Right.
It's really, and not only that, but you're doing it because that's your contribution. Well, if your contribution now is getting 15 or 20 a game, and so
it's got to be like somewhere in the middle, right? Like if Jaden's 11, not that,
or even, or what I like, what seems to work out sometimes is mixing in a lot of 5, 7, 11-point games with an occasional 25, occasional 22. I mean, give Jaden his candy when the candy's there to be snatched, but don't necessarily fold it in to the point where he's your third option or whatever, I don't know.
I think in the right like everyone does that thing, like, oh, need Jaden to not be the fifth option, and he needs to be like
I don't mind
option.
being the fifth option.
Yeah, well, and I think my take on it is he probably only could be a third option in like the Oklahoma City, Boston 5-out style. I think
Jaden, a poor man's Jada.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like that's, if I was Oklahoma City and I had all these picks and stuff, and you sat down there in your meeting of like, who's a player that they probably wouldn't want to target, but if we wanted to do like a kind of stupid throwing picks at them trade offer, like Jaden McDaniels would be up there for me if I was the Thunder. And so
not Reid.
True. Well, again, which is all to say that like they fit that style of play. I think that's a fair thesis, right? To say that they
absolutely. I didn't disagree with you at all on that. I thought that was good. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up in response to what you said before, we should be able to, with this happening and this happening, this happening, we should be able to. I want to know why the Wolves offense remains so stubbornly inefficient. If shoulds,
dude.
Well, but I mean, this is a year and a half now, and this is a mediocre offense in terms of efficiency, and it matters. I mean, we've seen what Boston's efficiency has done to help them on defense against Dallas. And one of the Wolves' biggest problems on defense is getting burned in transition when they're turning it over or they are falling down, making layups or whatever. I mean, there is this, the beauty of Finch's philosophy is how offense and defense flow. One doesn't end and the other begins. So, cut and dried. It's in those moments when the offense is becoming defense that the Wolves' inefficiency on offense gets even worse and hurts that defense even more. And so not only are they kind of mediocre on defense, but they kind of drag down the best defense in the NBA.
Right. Well, see, and like, that's the interesting thing is like, not a coach, having no idea what really goes into implementation, right?
Yep. That prefaces every single statement I make.
Yeah, right. but I guess I just like, I wonder about, and we were kind of asking Finch about that along those lines in the exit interview of like, do you need to commit to a style of play in training camp that you build in and like is the way offensively? Or can you just kind of get to things throughout the course of the season, maybe matchup dependent, play call your way through it a little bit more? I don't know. I don't know, but I've covered and watched Finch teams for 3 years now, and find myself getting to those dead periods of offense where the Wolves just are bad offensively for 2 weeks. And you go, oh my gosh, it feels like something needed to have been implemented before. They need to put in more, more structure now. And I don't know like how hard that is to do on the fly. And that kind of goes back to the, like, do you have it in your bag? Well, if we have 3 different things in our bag, do they all kind of stink, like,
right.
And that's just going to be the fascinating part about this, and why we all hope it's a very true sentiment that Finch is in fact like an offensive genius that can put these things together. But when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, it's like that was one of my questions. It's not that I necessarily doubt Finch, but I don't think in the NBA we've seen this proof of concept that he is a offensive wizard.
I agree.
But the counterpoint to that is the year before they traded for Rudy, January, February, March, April, the second half of that 21-22 season, the Wolves were number 1 in offense. So it kind of comes to the question then of, well, does it need to be that? Does the team need to be playing that style of play to be number 1 within Finch's style of offense? Like, these are the things I don't know. But
right. And one of the things that I always thought was telling is when they got Gobert in that deal, they were excited about what they could activate within him on offense. And that did not happen. I think that was something that they overestimated they were going to be able to do. I think they were going to be thinking they were going to be able to incorporate Rudy in ways. I mean, they sold him on that. They got him excited about it. They got us intrigued by it. But
then we saw 6 post-ups in the preseason in the game, and we're like, no.
The way that Rudy, Quinn Snyder did about as good a job with how Rudy Gobert functions on offense as anybody, And if in fact the Wolves thought they were going to be able to incorporate the kind of offense you're talking about,
right, with
Rudy Gobert added, I think that was a mistake. That was an overestimation, at least so far.
Yeah. No, I think so too. And I think they've still been trying to find that. And I think they've found some things. But at the end of the day, the answer for getting more out of Rudy Gobert offensively, I think, is almost always going to directly correlate to how much you put him in ball screen action. If as a role threat or just as a screener to create advantages. And that went up this year. That went up this year. But if we know it's not going to be 5-out offense, which it's not, if you have Rudy Gobert, then you need to ask yourself, what are the styles? What do we need to do within a 4-out, 1-in offense that boosts the efficiency overall?
And what we saw, what clearly happened in that week between the Phoenix loss on the last game of the regular season and the beginning of the first round, was that Gobert was meant to play not quite at the nail, a little bit between the nail and the ring beneath the basket, the charge circle, catch the ball and immediately spin and hit somebody on the perimeter. I mean, that didn't happen a lot in the regular season. It's not with the regularity it began to happen in the postseason. Is they wanted Rudy to catch it and immediately swing. I mean, remember that little kind of stunted dervish move he does where he's kind of like, I won't do it. Anyway, but essentially it wasn't ineffective. It actually worked out pretty good because it was ball movement. If Rudy Gobert gets an entry pass, everybody's antenna goes up and at least one person is helping on the double. Right. So that quick pass can set in motion a Celtic-like chain reaction of swing, swing, swing. And that may be one of the ways that you improve your ball movement and outside shooting with Rudy on the floor. But the Wolves didn't have it down enough to do it. And I'm not sure that I don't think his court vision, he's got wonderful court vision on defense. I do not think he has great court vision on offense. I don't think he knows where one guy is open. I'm not sure he knows where the best guy is open.
I think that improved though this season.
It did.
Maybe it got to one, if to use that. But, but I think that's probably part of the answer.
I agree.
Is Rudy being able to maybe as a passer or a position like
the
a little
spoke
bit
in the
more.
wheel, right? The guy who basically is the center spoke guy who just basically kicks it back out as the wheel turns.
Do you have a little bit more time to? I wanted to ask you about Jerry West. You have more time to do that?
Yeah, by all means, sure.
Okay, let's grab another quick break here to let you all know that today's show is also brought to you by Adriana Lonick at Coldwell Banker Realty. And if you are in the home buying process this summer, even just considering it, we would love it if you would go to thedancingrealtor.com. This is like, if you go to thedancingrealtor.com, you can see this, the splash page comes up where you can win free Wolves tickets if you book a strategy session with Adriana. But just basically, if you are in the home buying or home selling process, you are going to need help in that process. And we would love for you to consider Adriana at Coldwell Banker Realty. Again, thedancingrealtor.com. That's down in the show notes, or you can call or text her at 715-304-9920 to book a consultation and get you rolling there. And you'll also be entered to win some free lower level tickets to a Wolves game next season. Again, thedancingrealtor.com. So Britt, I was just obviously, Jared West passes away and he's out of my time frame,
Yes,
and so it's one of those, when you're my age, you like have this respect for players that you never watched play. And he's probably up there for me of that respect as much as I have for anyone without playing, just going off of things I've read or heard or whatever. But I put that down in notes. It's like, I'm just curious what, as someone who has seen Jerry West play or more so followed that than I did, what was he like as a player, and what did he mean to the league through your lens?
Well, I mean, I grew up in pretty much Boston, very first ring suburb Boston, and then out in the country in Massachusetts. But essentially, the Celtics were my team growing up. And I was born in 53. I've said this before. I think they won like 11 rings between 58 and 71 or something.
Must be nice.
It was wonderful. I mean, basically there was like 3 or 4 years between the ages of 6 and 18 where they didn't win a ring, But when you're 9, 10, 12, 16 years old, I mentioned those ages because the Celtics beat the Lakers in the finals each of those years when I was 9, 10, 12, and 16. And they were wonderful. I mean, high drama for me. I was, a kid fan. So I was I was living and dying in my own little way about
that was like the Jordan Bulls for me though. And that is a staple of my, I know I didn't know what I was like thinking or seeing or whatever, but it is a staple of my memory of basketball.
And what made it weird is if the games were in LA, we didn't see them because it was TV, I mean, TV wasn't playing the Lakers at 11 o'clock at night in Boston. That wasn't an idea, So we were able to see, the televised, I believe, and some of it may have been on tape delay, and the Lakers may have been on tape delay too. But I was listening on what it was crazy. It was a shortwave radio that my father had that didn't have to be shortwave. You could make it a regular radio, but it got really good reception. And, listening to Johnny Most. So a lot of the time I remember being in my room and just like listening, Johnny Most had this, he had this kind of tone of voice. And he was the original guy who went bang, Green stole that. Yeah. But anyway, listening to those games and watching those games, Elgin Baylor and Jerry West were incredibly good. They were both all-stars, like perennially. And it was a case of teamwork, kind of similar to the Dallas Celtic thing right now, quite frankly. They had two guys who were phenomenal, and then the Celtics were just a better team. But Jerry West had some performances that were just remarkable. And I tweeted this out the other day. The person that, younger generations might be comped on this is John Stockton. And it wasn't that, he was a phenomenal assist guy. He was like most of the guards back then, the combo guards. He scored a ton of points, got a ton of rebounds, and had a ton of assists. But he wasn't the passer that Stockton was. But the way he was Stockton-esque was that if it required like a little extra, he figured out a way to be, like he'd do something maybe a little dirty or maybe a little heavily physical or maybe something improbable that worked. And he had the most, I said that one of the top 2 or 3 pure shooters I've seen. I mean, in that category, I got to put, maybe Ray Allen, Reggie Miller, George Gervin. I don't know. You just see players who were just phenomenally great shooters. Steph Curry, obviously. But he was one of those like classic straight up and down shooters, ball in front of from his forehead.
Yeah.
But just a great shooter with incredible range. I mean, the 3-point shot wasn't there. If it was, they might have won some of those, because nobody was hitting long range shots. And he came into the league. He was drafted 2nd overall in the 1960 draft. Oscar Robertson was drafted 1st. Oscar Robertson's like, he's maybe like on my 2nd more, because I got Akeem and, I got KG now. But Oscar Robertson and Jerry West were probably the 2 most accomplished players of my youth in terms of as a kid watching them play. Yeah. Russell, I loved because he was my Celtic and he won, but he wasn't like, I wasn't old enough to understand why he was helping that team win all the time.
Sure.
I mean, I saw him block shots and be great on defense, but it took me until like maybe by the 69 series where they beat the Lakers and I was 16, I was figuring out, hey, what defense, and Bob Ryan was writing in the Globe and kind of instructing me on defense.
Well, that's what I was going to ask some too, is like, so how are you like in the 60s shaping 60s, 70s, shaping opinions of like what players even are, if the limited access to it,
limited access. Right. A lot of it was they had a game pretty much every Saturday and maybe every Sunday, but I was reading the Globe and Ryan was the, beat writer. And I probably went to 2 or 3 games a year because it's what I always wanted to, for my birthday or for this, or, and Red Auerbach was, they were the best team. So there was a lot of coverage.
Sure.
The Celtics were on a lot. And, and there were like 8 teams, I think, or whatever. There weren't a lot of teams. But talking about Jerry West, he was born and raised in West Virginia, went to West Virginia University. This is 1950s, I almost, when I tweeted out my admiration for him, I almost called him a peckerwood. And I looked up what the word is, and it turns out it's an ethnic slur. So, we used to call people peckerwoods who are like tough motherfuckers from the country, and that's why I would have said that about him. He was tough. If he got fouled, he got right back up. He wasn't one of these guys that, he just played. I actually read something during this whole time because he died and there was all this chatter around. Somebody was saying that Jerry West said something about people talk about, guys nowadays who work really hard, they're dogs. Yeah. He said, well, I was a wolf. I ate dogs,
Sick line. That's so cool.
But that's the way he played. He played like, and that's why, and Stockton had that gene in him. Now, Stockton has turned out, politically to be an asshole. For all I know, Jerry West is too, was too. But essentially there was just a competitive fire. West Virginia is a backwoods in the 50s, especially, it was it's the mountains, it's Stills, it's Dukes of Hazzard, it's, that's what West Virginia in the 50s was, anyway.
No, this is interesting. I didn't, I didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, Jerry West was tough and he was wiry. And, obviously he looks like the logo. I mean, he was not really an ounce of fat on him. I think he was about 6'5", which is taller back then than it is now. But he was always a guard. He was always somebody who organized the team. Baylor was the swing man and about the same height, but a much bigger leaper. And they were fabulous together, And then they added Wilt one year. And that was
right.
That was the year. That might have been the year they lost in 7. But I mean, West always elevated his game in the playoffs, and he almost beat the Celtics 2 or 3 times. And I remember just fearing him and hating him at the same time. At the same time, when you watch him on TV, even that's what I was impressed by. I was impressed by guys who just were. There was very little passing a lot of times. They just run down the floor, pull up, and shoot. I mean, a lot of possessions were like that back then.
Sounds like the Celtics right now.
Except there was a lot more ball movement now. But anyway, West would come down the floor and just, elevate and just such a pretty shot. And this is before he was the first shooter that dazzled me with form. I guess that's the easiest way to put it. Because when he went up, it just looked, 1 minute he's on the ground and the next minute he's in the air, and he's going straight up and the ball is just not hitting the rim. And it just, it's pure. And so, yeah, it was fascinating. And the Lakers were the second best team most of the time. The Syracuse Nationals were for a while with Dolph Schayes, but they couldn't take care of the Celtics. And then the Royals with Oscar and Arlen Barkhorn and Jerry Lucas were in the mix, but it was usually the Lakers and the Celtics. And it provided the Celtics got by the 76ers and Wilt. But it was a great time to be like immersed in it. And I'll be honest, I mean, I was a multi-sport fan. Basketball wasn't necessarily my favorite sport back then. I just loved it all, whatever season it was.
Yeah.
But the impression it made on me because they won. They just won all the time. Yeah. And so you were wondering, will this be their 7th ring in a row? Well, they're really good opponents this year. And the Lakers would take them to 6 or 7 games and it would be in the balance for quite a while.
I mean, winning the finals MVP in a series you lose is just like a cool folklore.
And he did that in 69.
Yeah. My only contribution to this off of any of that, and this is stupid, but I'm going to say it. When like you see an old guy and you go, I could tell you played basketball. Like you still kind of like have that, like when I thought about when you said the wiry body type, the logo. I was at Summer League last year and we must've been staying at the same hotel that the Clippers were at. And like in Vegas, you try to get anything, it takes 20 minutes to get it. So I'm at Starbucks. I order my coffee and I'm just sitting there waiting. And Jerry West is there as well on the phone. And that was so striking to me. I guess he would have been, this is a year ago, 85 years old.
Yep.
I'm like, that dude looks like he played basketball. Right. Like, I mean, I know it's Jerry West, but just like the body type, which I just thought was so, just like sitting there, waiting for my coffee, looking, I'm like, well, one, this is cool. This is Jerry West. Never seen Jerry West before. But to that, and then also he's on the phone that whole time. And he's like, clearly he's 85 years old. And he's clearly like talking about like the summer league roster, like the offseason. He was a, consultant for the Clippers or whatever. And I'm like, this is cool because this dude is still now literally a year away from death and is like up at 8 a.m. in Vegas, getting his coffee, ready to
talking about kids who were trying to make the grade, right?
Yeah, that's so cool. I think that was actually at Summer League where he had the dogs versus wolf thing. He was on some panel or whatever, but that's what it is. That's cool. I mean, it's now I'm like much more associating this to, you kind of growing up like 60s, maybe early 70s of like kind of falling in love with basketball. Like that was me 90s, early 2000s.
Right.
And it was kind of, it's like Jordan into Kobe and, for you too, like Celtics into that, that next.
Well, the Celtics
evolution.
evolved, into like Havlicek and Dave Cowens,
Mm-hmm. Last thing, because we're probably not going to do another episode, during this series, just how will you remember this Celtics season and this Celtics championship, assuming, they get it done?
The fact that the weirdness of Joe Mazzulla was effective is certainly one of the things. I mean, that dude,
bizarre cat, man.
If you go to see him pregame or postgame, man, I made a habit now.
Me too. We would go together. You'd be like, you want to go to Missoula? And normally, I'm like, no, I'm not going to go to.
Right. And also like this weird kind of passive aggressive relationship he has with the media. It's like sometimes he loves the question, and sometimes he mistakenly thinks the question is derogatory, and he starts going off on something which maybe it is. I mean, maybe they have such an incestuous relationship that I don't know what they're talking on a subtextual level, but it is funny to hear these answers and everything. And every now and then he'll just say, we should welcome this. Or, he gets off on these like broad, expansive topics. But that team is playing like a team that is going to be there for a while. I mean, we say this after every championship, of course. But if they sweep on Friday, even if they don't, if it's a gentleman's sweep, 16-3. There's a few teams that have done that, and they get correctly placed in the pantheon. Dallas got here the hard way. They beat 350-win teams.
Sure.
And that was one of the reasons I picked Dallas for this series. I thought their road was a lot more rugged. But that step up in class to the Celtics, boy, was a different thing. Yeah. And the Celtics, I think, probably knew it all along just by they mic'd up Jaylen Brown the other night. And the guy didn't ever seem like he was, all they were worried about is a letdown. I mean, they were not worried about what Dallas was doing.
Right.
And so
I think for me, it's like a stylistic efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like, think about the last decade, right? Kind of with Golden State and Houston. And there was this like efficiency based on like, hey, we're just going to shoot more threes than you. And we have better 3-point shooters than you, the classic, gun to a knife fight sort of idea. But there was always, I think particularly with Houston, there was always
Houston was not fun to watch.
Yeah. There was just that's what I'm saying. It was just like a choice to hit these buttons over and over again. Whereas like Boston is kind of still hitting the same buttons, but it's more like piano keys, and there's like a rhythm to it, like I think they're this emblem of efficiency at math in many ways, though I don't think we'll necessarily remember them as that, because the Warriors and the Rockets will kind of serve as the emblems of that, of the,
and I mean, 2000s. You have Harden and Chris Paul. And then you have like Curry, Draymond, and Clay, But Tatum, Brown, and Holiday, what you have there.
Right.
Another thing I love about basketball is the Celtics were top 3 in offense and defense. And if you're well balanced, you're going to win. I should have, these things, you get so wrapped up in the minutiae, you forget the basic points. If a team is a top 3 offense and a top 3 defense, guess what? They are really going to be hard to beat. And
it's math.
And they have proven that this year. They're hungry. The idea that, Brown and Tatum are like 27 and 26 or something, I mean, they have both a couple more years to hit their prime, and they already understand what it takes to be a champion. I'm loving the fact that, I mean, for a long time I was ridiculed, and probably in the end properly so. But you remember, I always used to say Jaylen Brown was better than Tatum.
You did.
And
I forgot about that. I didn't know. I didn't text you about that at all. Oh man.
Right. And so it was one of those things where it still probably isn't true now, but it's closer now. I'm just taking on a satisfaction in the idea that Tatum was always given like, oh, he's so clearly better than Jaylen Brown. And I think it was the time, it was a real marquee game. Might have even been a Christmas game where Jaylen Brown was called upon to guard LeBron, like in kind of maybe not the peak of LeBron's career, but not that far afterwards, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And he was just perfect at it. And then he come down, and
it was when LeBron, oh my God, LeBron was on the Cavs.
Yes, it was. Yeah. It was when LeBron was on the Cavs. And I just thought to myself, that guy, it's kind of like when we see Ant take care of John Moran or Paul George or somebody, and you go, oh, he's got that in his bag, I mean, and Jaylen Brown does it more consistently than Ant does it. He still has a tendency to turn the ball over. His shot selection occasionally isn't great, but both of those things have been cleaned up, I think. And he remains really the leader of the team in terms of being outspoken and being like the guy who is like the chest of the team,
but like kind of in his own way too, not loud.
Right. And very bright. And I love the fact that he got the bag, he got paid, because, it was a ton of money for the quote unquote second best player on the team, but it paid off. And then
it's the cat contract.
Exactly. And then the last thing I guess I want to say is that I picked Milwaukee over the Celtics in the East to begin the season. And it was because I was just really enamored of the idea of Dame Lillard and Giannis being together as like the perfect tandem. But how did it escape me that they punted Drew Holiday? I mean, it's like
age.
And now it has come back that, Drew Holiday is a better basketball player than Dame Lillard. He is. I would rather have him on my team. Any smart basketball player or coach or front office exec would rather have Drew Holiday on their team than Dame Lillard. It just is fact. And why I let that go by, Drew Holiday, Chris Finch, I think he's one of Chris Finch's best players. Anybody who's been with Drew Holiday, he's voted best teammate in player polls every year. Right. Every coach who's ever had him gushes about him. He plays in a self-effacing manner because he's making everybody else better all the time. And I just, what a great, and there's another thing I was wrong about. I didn't think Brad Stevens was going to be a great, POBO or GM, whatever they call it. He's been fabulous.
Well, he's kind of got the image of, and we look at these last two champions of like, obviously it was like Jokic and Murray at the top, but it was like perfectly filing in 3, 4, 5, 6, right. Porter Jr., KCP, Gordon and Bruce Brown that year.
Yep.
And then this Celtics team is the same thing. It's like, it's Tatum and Brown, but it's Holiday, Porzingis, White and Horford.
Yep.
And, exactly. and so now I think when we see how like the whole league reconfigures itself in the offseason, we start thinking about who the best teams are. Like Philly will be probably a pretty good example of that, right? Of like, if it's their two guys, what are they going to get 4 through 6? And if they get a 4 through 6 that looks like Milwaukee's 4 through 6 this year, I'm going to need to remind myself of like, hey, I'm not sure like the two guys and just, role players is enough anymore.
Exactly.
And that's, I guess, to the Wolves' credit, like they maybe don't have the same force of a 1-2 punch in both Ant and Cat,
right.
Ant compared to the other very best number ones in the league and Cat compared to the very best number 2s in the league.
Yep.
They probably need a little bit more there. You can find that, but they do provided Conley and Gobert don't take a step back, they probably do have a lot of that 3, 4, 5, 6,
Right.
Beyond the 2 stars there. But yeah, I think this Denver and Boston season, and both of those teams, like, clearly after the fact, seeming like they were in fact the best team in the league. We should remember that,
Right.
and maybe
Right.
this is where roster construction is the efficient point of roster construction is evolving as we've now moved out of the big 3 super team sort of
Right.
idea.
And it was just because of the complementary aspect of Giannis and Dame. But that Milwaukee season, what a weird season, huh? I mean, they hired this guy and then they fired him, and then they brought in Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers as like the postseason answer is such a weird choice, and
I just felt like they're scrambling. That's just the weird point of when you get into that like post-championship, but Giannis is still there and ready to win a championship.
And it's Milwaukee,
scrambling. Yeah.
I mean, it's not LA or Boston or any of the signature franchises,
Right. It is. It's, I think and this is way down the line, maybe 5-6 years down the line with Ant, but right. If you've really been all of Ant's early and mid 20s going to win,
right.
Just from a roster construction standpoint and salaries and all that, you like any team, whether it's Ant or, Oklahoma City will get there too with Shea when that gets expensive of like, how do you, I don't know. I think we're going to enter this like stage where the most like logical thing to do when you have a star player will be to like pick a couple years to go for it and a couple years to like take a step back and go for it. If you want to have that like 8-10 year run, I don't think the idea of a sustained winner is actually possible.
What did Tim Connolly say to us in the exit interviews? I thought it was a great line. I mean, he said, we don't have no idea what the second apron is going to mean.
Yeah.
He said, but the one thing we do know is you do not want to stay in the penalty for very long. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I thought those two things astride each other were a really good 2-point template as to how you run a team is we don't know. We're not going to throw our hands up and go, we can't do this.
Right.
At the same time, we want to keep in mind, we don't want to bind ourselves to the point where we're like a triple penalty team, and I thought it made me feel better again about Connolly.
It seems right. It seems logical.
I'm becoming more and more of a, I mean, obviously I'm late to the party on this. I had a lot of skepticism early, but the guy really is it's nice to know he's around for at least another year. And I think he'll be around. I think he likes what's going on, unless the owners just totally murder each other. I think it's going to be, I think it's going to work out.
He's around for at least a year and probably beyond that. But yeah, that is what is required to craft a champion now, and particularly like a really good team for an extended year stretch is to kind of have those navigation skills. Well, this was fun, Britt. I'm going for a while now. I think we'll probably get on here again before the draft. I haven't really started digging into it too much other than some mock drafts and stuff like that. But obviously
doesn't seem like a killer class.
Not from what I'm reading. It's always,
but then again, I mean, you 27 and 37, that could be a good thing. If everything is up in the air, then that helps the late pickers, I think.
Yeah. And maybe I was talking to somebody yesterday of like, so if this is the quality of the class, like just putting 37 and 27 together, get you up higher for a leap in the draft, if all things are equal, like, would that kind of make sense? Or, how does that all work? But yeah, to the Conley and piecing this together in a second apron team, the draft,
right?
That's where you can get your pieces that can grow, because everything else is going to be minimum contracts. We know that those don't, they just kind of are what they are. They don't progress over time. Right. So we'll see there with the draft and free agency. We'll get Britt back on to do more of that. But yeah, I think next week we'll wrap up our positional segments thing like we did. Chris and I did guards. Jason and I did wings. I think Kyle and I will do bigs. early next week. We'll keep kind of talking about the Wolves a little bit, getting us into the offseason. Britt, I appreciate you doing this. You guys can obviously follow Britt on Twitter at Britt Robson. You're reading him at Minpost, and we'll talk to him soon. Until maybe Tuesday next week with Kyle, he's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah.